So, before we got derailed by the Seattle Kraken placing Daniel Sprong on waivers, I was planning to make this video to go over some talk about the Detroit Red Wings and some of their potential trade options. Because we had ourselves a few articles over the past few hours here that talk about different guys, and I thought it'd be interesting to combine these two into a video. However, before we dive into that, I wanted to say that the Red Wings yesterday, oh yeah, baby, they got themselves their 5th win in a row, an overtime thriller against the Ottawa Senators. Take that, Senstown, because the Red Wings are no longer getting pushed around by this Sens team. Like, seriously. The amount of times the freaking Ottawa Senators have been beating up on Detroit the past few years, it's been kind of remarkable, to be honest, to see a team have Detroit's number in such a consistent way. But the Wings, thanks to Patty Kane, get that dub in extra time. Alex Lyon, unfortunately, had to leave the game, but of course we are all hoping for the best with him. But with all that aside, let's go over to the trade side of things. Because earlier this morning, we had ourselves Elliotte Friedman on the 32 Thoughts written article, and we also had ourselves the Fourth Period's David Pagnotta giving a little bit of a scoop on the Red Wings and, just some conversations that we could go out there and discuss. So I'll leave a link in the description to each of these articles, to a Reddit post, as well as to ExpressVPN down there in the box. So if you need a VPN, go out there and check the first link in the description. It helps you out, it helps me out, and we all benefit. Let's go over onto 32 Thoughts, though, because earlier this morning, What Happened Between the Canucks and the Rangers was published by Elliotte Friedman. Let's skip over all the Vancouver and New York talk and go straight over to what Friedman writes about with the Red Wings. Take a look at thought number 15. It's the same information we have heard before, but it is really interesting that it's now Friedman going out there and speaking about it. I believe the Buffalo player that the Red Wings were/are looking at is Dylan Cozens. And this, of course, is not technically new. We had ourselves a Buffalo podcast going out there and saying that the Red Wings were interested in Cozens, but a lot of people were kind of questioning the legitimacy as to whether or not that actually was the case. Obviously, that podcast, After the Whistle, was hosted by former NHLers Craig Rivet and Andrew Peters, so if I were a betting man, I'd probably say that they have more connections within the NHL than maybe you or me or any other of these random fans that go onto Twitter and YouTube just talking whatever. But that was the idea from a few days ago, and now Friedman has talked about it as well, which I think does give it a little bit more credibility. So, let's dive into it one more time. If the Red Wings are in the market for a young center, they want a guy to be the number 2 behind Dylan Larkin. They don't think that Andrew Kopp is the answer long-term, nor is JT Compher the guy to get it done. If they think that Kasper is a little bit a ways away, or maybe he's better suited for the wing, and if they feel like a guy like Nate Danielson could only max out as a third or a second-line guy in the longer term, maybe you want yourselves a guy who can step in right now, who also happens to be young. Dylan Cozens being that guy certainly makes sense to me, although you would have to make sure that he is able to bring the best out of himself and get back up to the standard that he had set with the contract that he had signed. He's making $7.1 million a year till the end of 2030, and this season he is only on pace for 40 points. He was on pace for a lot more in prior years. He had a 68-point season in 22-23, which is what helped him earn the contract in the first place. But now he's going down through a little bit of a slump, and I will say it has gotten a tad better over the past little while for Cozens, but only if you look at certain stints. I mean, he's got 7 points in his last 10 games, great, but only 1 point in his last 5. So there was a 5-game stretch where he did have 6 points, and that obviously is a little bit better than the holistic product that we are seeing out of Cozens this year. But if Detroit is going to give him an opportunity to revive himself, I do think that Cozens fits the mold of a player that Todd McLellan would be looking for. You note the game plan that McLellan has for this Red Wings team and what kind of effort he wants to see out of his guys. Dylan Cozens, the workhorse from Whitehorse, would be able to replicate that and play it off to a T. I definitely do believe in his overall work ethic and his skills on top of that. Would he be an option for Detroit? Maybe, who really knows? I mean, we've been seeing Cozens' name linked to other teams like Vancouver, for example, and that was always a really interesting opportunity because if the Canucks could package one of their top centers for a guy like Cozens alongside of another defenseman, that obviously would be an interesting way to go about things. But speaking about the Vancouver Canucks, I wanted to go over onto another article on thefourthperiod.com. This was from 2 days ago by David Pagnotta, What the Canuck is Going On in Vancouver. This is, of course, an article that we had discussed yesterday in going over the Elias Pettersson trade price with the Buffalo Sabres. But this article does talk a little bit more about the Red Wings, and it talks about this same Pettersson-Miller situation. Here's a comment made by David Pagnotta about the Red Wings and the Canucks. Maybe I'm wrong, but I am not overly convinced the Red Wings have the desire to move any of their top young studs for either of JT Miller or Elias Pettersson. However, they are linked. Teams like the Sabres, Red Wings, Wild, and Rangers will continue to be linked to either or both players, and there are other teams poking around, obviously. But the Canucks feel they have the base of a team capable of competing for a championship, and nobody wants to derail that. Vancouver will almost certainly give up the best current player in any trade, but the return will have to align with their objective of chasing a Stanley Cup, even in package form. And so when you think about Detroit being linked to the Pettersson-Miller sweepstakes, it does get a little bit interesting when you acknowledge that David Pagnotta is saying here that he doesn't think that the Red Wings would be interested in moving any of their top young talents for any of these players. But realistically, if you're thinking about Pettersson or something, I mean, you're going to have to make a really big trade, right? You're going to have to shell out some value here. In fact, it was actually a conversation popping up on the Red Wings subreddit from time to time as well. Take a look at this post. It was uploaded, like, literally this morning by Yzerman. Give me your best trade pitch for Elias Pettersson. Frankly, I don't see how we can make a deal for him, but I do want him. Obviously, Larkin, Seider, Raymond, Sandin, Pelech, Kosa, and Augustine are untouchable. Does anyone have a realistic pitch? And, oh man, that's a really difficult one to go out there and analyze when you break it down like that. I mean, as a Canucks and a Wings fan, obviously I see the value in both of these parties' assets, but you're gonna have to give up something to make Vancouver bite if you want to make a Pettersson trade. In fact, a lot of people are saying that they would rather go after other players. I'd rather go for Cozens, I'd want to go for Mikko Rantanen, Pettersson's contract is too high, etc., etc., don't need him, but there are some people who are acknowledging the idea. Sweet Theory 3319 says, I'm going to take a stab at this Pettersson thing. Firstly, Nate Danielson. Secondly, a first-round pick in 25. Thirdly, a first-round pick in 26. And fourthly, JT Compher. I'm not saying I like this deal for us, but the Canucks have indicated they want a center. With this deal, they get a young talent, a proven defensive center, and picks. Again, I'm not liking this deal for us, but Pettersson is a 100-point player who would instantly make us better even though he's having a down year. The only issue is the contract. I'm not sure if we have the space for it even with this deal. And here's the thing, this is where I get a little bit defensive as a Canucks fan because there are some people replying he was a 100-point player once. Very inconsistent. 3 seasons with 60, 2 with over 80, this year he's on pace for 55. He would make our second line better, no debate, but that's way too much for him. He would immediately be the best player on the team, and another comment says he is still overpaid. And you know, I'm going to say that I'm only really defensive because I'm butthurt that he isn't really as good as he could be, but that is accurate. I would say that Pettersson is probably the best player on the Red Wings if he was placed onto that team, but it's not really obvious. Like, if I'm taking them all at the best play possible, like if I'm saying, all right, you are all the best versions of yourself for the next week, I'm picking Pettersson before Larkin, before Raymond, before Seider, before anybody. I think he is the best player. But he is just so inconsistent this year that it becomes a little bit frustrating to acknowledge that. However, this trade idea is not necessarily one that I think the Vancouver Canucks would bite too much upon because they do want to be competitive, and this trade is just really a downgrade from Pettersson to Compher. Not unless the Canucks use the draft picks and the extra cap space that they'd freed up from getting rid of Pettersson to make a trade with some other team for a defenseman or something. Then I could see this trade going down and actually making sense for Vancouver. But ultimately, most of the commenters here are actually talking about Nate Danielson or somebody else like that. DeBrincat could be an option. I kind of do like DeBrincat on the Canucks, to be honest, but I'm not too sure. Who knows? Besser, Miller, DeBrincat? Ooh. Talk about an all-American line. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments section below about this Detroit Red Wings update in regards to Cozens and Petey. Friedman has linked Detroit to Cozens. Pagnotta links Detroit to Miller and Pettersson. Let me know in the comments what do you think. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.